Wrestling fans, are you ready? For the untold numbers listening at home, at work, in their cars, at the gym, and anywhere else people listen to podcasts. From Keene in the Shire, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to get hyped for the Penguin Club Podcast.
Oh, we're just getting started, baby. Because I stay hyped!
Welcome to the Penguin Club Podcast, where we today are going inside, metaphorically speaking, of course, inside Hell in a Cell. That's right, we're previewing Hell in a Cell. Going to delve in. There are 8 matches, including the pre-show match. That is, unless, like the last time I did this, there was a match that got announced almost immediately after I finished recording. And don't you just hate that when you finish something and then, oh, there's an update here yet. So before I delve into the predictions here, want to give a too sweet to Mr. Jonathan Dunker because he wound up joining the Penguin Club at the $5 mark. You too can join the Penguin Club and get a too sweet on the next podcast that we do. Go to penguinclubpod.com. Now, that website takes you directly to the Patreon, and from there you can find links to the RSS feeds. We're on Google Play now, we're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher, we're on TuneIn, and in a couple of months after we get 5 episodes, we will be submitting the podcast to iHeartRadio. And there are a couple of things that are required for a show to be added to the iHeartRadio app. One of them is you have 5 episodes. Another is that the show be radio friendly. Meaning, if it can't be aired on broadcast radio, it will not be accepted for the iHeartRadio app. And that's something that's definitely going to separate the Penguin Club podcast from all of the other wrestling podcasts. Plus, the fact that we actually have a time limit for the show, where most podcasts, and this comes because of my background in radio, to where most podcasts, they're just, we're going to sit here and talk for however long we talk. This podcast is a 30-minute show. That means that it's always going to be 30 minutes. Unless, once the Penguin Club winds up reaching certain goals through the Patreon, then there will be patron-only content. That content will not abide by the time limit that I have set for myself, meaning it could be shorter, it could be longer. That said, one more thing before jumping in. You've probably heard by now, maybe not, that the WWE decided to punch down. What do I mean by that? Well, the tag team known as the Young Bucks, they're probably the best-known tag team not in the WWE. They, until recently, were the Ring of Honor Tag Team Champions. They lost those belts at Death Before Dishonor. They did retain the 6-man tag titles. They're also, I believe, the IWGP Tag Champions. But they, for several years, along with other members of the Bullet Club, including the greatest professional wrestler in the world today, Mr. Kenny Omega, they've been using the Too Sweet hand sign and saying Too Sweet. Well, Vince McMahon, a couple of years ago, decided that he was going to try trademarking or copywriting or somehow getting government protection of the hand sign and the words Too Sweet. He abandoned that process and, well, just recently, as in within like the last week and a half, the Young Bucks got a cease and desist letter from WWE saying you are prohibited from making money off of, what we're claiming is our intellectual property. Now, here at the Penguin Club, we believe that copying is not theft, because if I use your catchphrase, I'm not depriving you of being able to use your catchphrase. If I copy a move that you have done, or if I, wind up saying words in a manner very similar to a manner that you said some words, I've not deprived you of saying those. I'm not depriving you of your thoughts by having a similar thought. So, the whole idea behind intellectual property is completely flawed. As my friend Davi Barker, the Muslim agorist, once said, and I'll paraphrase because I don't remember the exact manner in which he put the words, but he said something along the lines of copyright and intellectual property is basically claiming to own the neurons in someone else's brain. Because that's what happened. When you have a thought, there are, synapses that fire and neurons and other things. And if I claim that I own this particular set of words in this particular order, and you think of that, or you go to say that, or you go to write that, and I claim, you have deprived me of a thought. Well, what I'm actually claiming is that I own the synapses and the neurons in your brain. And when you look at it that way, you see how completely flawed it actually is. But then there's also the whole thing of, what's the saying? Never punch down. And that's what Vince McMahon is doing with sending that cease and desist to the Young Bucks. And they actually turned it around on him. And they made up a t-shirt that says cease and desist. And apparently those things have been flying off the metaphorical shelves of pro wrestling tees. Now, speaking of tees, Pro Wrestling Tees did announce that beginning in 2018, they are not going to have minimum thresholds for podcasts to be able to put up designs. Right now, you've got to have a social media reach of over 10,000. And, well, we just started a couple weeks ago. We're not there yet. We're a good ways from it. But I am glad that they are going to be expanding to allow more people to wind up putting designs up. And my current plan is, once they wind up allowing that, to then shift the merchandise from Teespring, where it's currently hosted, over to Pro Wrestling Tees. And speaking of Teespring, the current campaign ends on October 10th. So if you want to get an order in, it will ship early next week. Go to merch.penguinclubpod.com. Now, let's get into some predictions and previews of Hell in a Cell. And, some of these matches, it's kind of being given away how they're going to wind up turning out. Or are they? And the reason I say that is because, as mentioned in episode 1, WWE is bringing back Starrcade. And, well, they've already announced the card, or at least part of a card, for that Starrcade event. And I'm going to be referencing that event in giving my predictions. And now, as they always say, cards subject to change. But some of these, they appear that they're not going to wind up changing. Well, the who holds the title might change, but the match itself probably will not change. So, let's look at the pre-show. Chad Gable, Shelton Benjamin versus the Hype Bros. I don't get hype. I stay hype. Now, there's been some dissension between the Hype Bros, Mr. Mojo Rawley and Mr. Zack Ryder, the Long Island Iced Z. And Gable and Benjamin just got put together recently. So I think that it would be probably an unwise decision on the part of WWE Creative to have Gable and Benjamin wind up losing. Now, one thing that I've not noticed is that Chad Gable is no longer coming out holding the towel that says Ready, Willing, and Gable. That seemed to have been something he only did with Jason Jordan. I wish he would bring that towel back, just because I love the catchphrase and the pun of his name, Ready, Willing, and Gable. But I do think that Benjamin and Gable will wind up picking up the win. And I think you might wind up seeing the collapse or the furtherance of a storyline collapse between Mojo and Zack Ryder. And I know that I'm definitely in the minority here, but I like Mojo. And I like Zack. And I think that, both of these guys individually can do so much better than they can as a tag team, especially because as a tag team, they're just kind of there. So prediction here is Gable, Benjamin, and then look for Mojo and Ryder to maybe not this pay-per-view, but maybe a SmackDown, because they seem to be giving a bunch of stuff away on SmackDown. But sometime within the next month, I do think that you will see Mojo and Zack Ryder wind up turning on one another, more so Ryder turning on Mojo and then starting a singles feud there. The next match is Randy Orton versus Rusev. Rusev Machka, Rusev Crush. And yes, I know that Machka means like hit, and his theme song doesn't actually say Rusev Crush, but that's what Lana used to yell at him. These guys have shared a couple of 10-second victories over one another. And yes, I know the one was like 9 seconds and the other was 8. But the point is still the same. They both have very quick wins over one another. And both of those matches, there was screwy stuff beforehand. Randy Orton really has nothing else to do here. Rusev needs this win more than Randy Orton, especially because Orton, he's been around for a while. What are you going to do? Have him win and then go after the winner of Jinder versus Shinsuke? Well, no, you're not, because Starrcade's already been announced of who Jinder Mahal is fighting, and it's Shinsuke Nakamura. Jinder Mahal and Shinsuke Nakamura fighting in a steel cage at Starrcade. So, yeah, Randy Orton not going to win here. Rusev picks up the win. Next match, Bobby Roode, Glorious, versus Dolph Ziggler. Now, I'm in a minority here to where I'm actually kind of entertained by the Dolph Ziggler. I can do entrances better than you can do entrances because I'm better in the ring. That said, Dolph's not beating Bobby Roode. Dolph is not beating Bobby Roode at all. And I tend to agree with I think it was Steven Larson on the Going In Raw podcast a couple days ago. They said that it would be glorious if Bobby Roode winds up winning the match in like 15 seconds like he did over Mike Kanellis, to where, match starts, Ziggler runs at Roode. Roode hits him with a spine buster, glorious DDT. 1, 2, 3, ring the bell. It's over. I don't think it's going to be squash match versus Dolph Ziggler, but it will be fairly short, probably less than 7 minutes. But Bobby Roode winds up winning, and then hopefully Bobby Roode moves on to face AJ Styles. But, well, that's not going to happen before Starrcade. Or maybe it will, but if it does, he's going to lose because, again, they've already announced the U.S. title match at Starrcade, and Bobby Roode ain't in it. But again, I know card subject to change, blah, 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 fill in the blank. AJ Styles versus Baron Corbin for the U.S. title. I really kind of like the way the Baron Corbin-Ty Dillinger feud is going, to where they're basically fighting over who gets to fight AJ Styles. And that's something that you've not seen in a long time, especially on the mid-card title, to where I remember back in the 90s, the good old days of wrestling, the Attitude Era, where the guys going for the Intercontinental Championship, they were busting their ass for the chance at the Intercontinental title. And now it seems as though, just title matches happen. And, we're going to have a number one contender match. Not a feud to where people are fighting. No, I get to be the number one contender. And I almost had a Baron Corbinism there, to where, completely forgot how words work. And if you haven't been watching some of the SmackDowns, you might not understand what I'm saying there, to where Baron Corbin doesn't always word in the proper way. He's kind of and this is going to come off as the most absolutely horrible insult ever, but he's a less charismatic, smaller version of Sid Vicious / Psycho Sid. To where, remember, again, back in the 90s, where Sid Vicious or Psycho Sid, depending on the promotion he was in, would wind up giving just these absolutely horrible promos where he just didn't word properly. To where there was the one, I forget who he was arguing with, and then Scott Steiner would also have some of these. But there's the thing where Sid Vicious was doing something. Can we start over? And Mean Gene, this is live, pal. And then Scott Steiner, also the thing of, if I had half the brain that you had and half the man that you are, then something. And Baron Corbin just comes off as a less charismatic version of either of those two guys, and nowhere near as athletic. Now, that's not to take anything away, because I've never stepped into a wrestling ring as a competitor. So, he does things physically that I can't do. And I know that he gets mad when people criticize wrestlers, but at the same time, there's just something missing. Like, I definitely would not want to come across Baron Corbin in a dark alley and piss him off, because he could beat the crap out of me. I know he could. But as a pro wrestler, a sports entertainer, if you will, because I know Vince doesn't like hearing the word pro wrestler, he doesn't have it. And he's being buried, the whole losing the Money in the Bank cash in, and then getting beat by John Cena, where John Cena was literally laughing at him. And then AJ Styles even pointed out in his promo recently of, dude, you lost your guaranteed title. You got beat, and you're always getting beat. Now, maybe they're putting him down to where, underdog rises, blah, 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 and he does take the title. I just don't see it happening again, especially because the Starrcade match for the U.S. title, now, Baron Corbin is in that match. So maybe they're just going to keep it a triple threat, have the strap on Corbin for a month, and have Rusev also compete here. But again, because Rusev is in that match, that's part of why I think he's beating Randy Orton. But also, Orton has nothing to prove by winning. But I do think that AJ is going to retain, even though they could put the strap on Baron and still, not have to change the card for Starrcade. They'd just be changing who's the champion heading in. Also, I do hope that AJ Styles brings back the U.S. Open Challenge. That said, let's go to the next match. Natalya versus Charlotte for the SmackDown Women's title. I think that Charlotte is going to wind up picking up the win. Partly because Charlotte almost never loses at pay-per-views, and also Charlotte and Natty are facing off in a steel cage for the women's title at Starrcade. So it's the perfect way to where you can wind up still having that match without just saying, well, Charlotte lost, but then she won a number one contender match, and so now she's in. So you have Charlotte win. There's the automatic rematch clause that sometimes WWE forgets about, but here it makes perfect sense. So you have Charlotte beat Natty for the women's title, and no, I don't think that Carmella's going to go for a cash-in here, and I also don't think that she's going to wind up failing on the cash-in. I do think that they'll have Charlotte beat Natty clean, and then that rematch at Starrcade, Natty versus Charlotte, you then don't have to change the card. Next is one of two Hell in a Cell matches. This one of the very few tag team matches inside the Hell in a Cell. This is, of course, the WWE SmackDown Tag Team Champions of the World, The New Day versus the Usos. Now, I'm really liking the heel Usos. I do wish that this would have been an Uso penitentiary match. And now, nobody really knows what that would be, but there's speculation that if it were an Uso penitentiary match, there would be the old school steel cage, like the blue cage, inside the cell. Kind of like the Kennel from Hell, minus the dogs humping and defecating outside the ring. Question is whether or not Xavier Woods will wind up getting involved. He is injured. He's recovering, but again, there's no disqualification in a Hell in the Cell match. And also, again, the New Day and the Usos are going to be facing off at Starrcade in a Texas Tornado match, and it only makes sense for that match to happen if the Usos win here, which I think they will. Although I would love to see the New Day retain, because I'm really digging, the New Day, and I also really dig the Usos. But there's, the claims that WWE wants the New Day to wind up having the record for most title reigns. They already have the record for the longest tag title reign. But there's the claim that WWE, specifically Vince, wants New Day to wind up getting the record for most wins, or not most wins, but most title reigns as a tag team, and the only way you can do that is if you lose the title, and then you re-win the title. And having them, I know some people will call it hot potatoing the titles to where they just bounce back and forth, but it seems really natural here. So I do think that the Usos will wind up winning, capturing the tag titles, and then you wind up taking that to Starrcade, where, again, these two teams are facing off in a Texas Tornado match. And the Texas Tornado match basically means there doesn't have to be a tag. So one man leaves the ring, somebody else enters the ring, and there's no tag. And that's, I think Japanese-style wrestling does that as well, to where there doesn't have to be that tag. Next match, and I'm very disappointed here that this match is not inside a cell. And that I think the reason they're doing that is because it's going to be inside a steel cage at Starrcade. And I know there's speculation here that Jinder is only ever going to have the title once. And when he loses, he loses. and never gets a rematch. And WWE wants to keep the title on him until he goes to India in, I think it's early December, on part of that WWE India tour. But, again, because they've already announced the match for Starrcade, I think the only natural way you could have Shinsuke get a match at Starrcade is either the Singh brothers interfere at Hell in a Cell, and it's not a clean victory or it's a disqualification, and hey, you know what? It was a dirty match. That's why we've got to lock you guys in a steel cage. Singh brothers are prohibited from interfering at Starrcade. Or what I think is most likely going to happen, Shinsuke wins, holds the title to Starrcade, because Starrcade, November 25th, and if you can math, you know that November 25th is before they go to India in December. So you have Shinsuke win, hold the belt for at least a month and a half, maybe drop it to Jinder at Starrcade, and then Jinder takes the title to India, although Jinder is also going to India with the Raw brand. He's on SmackDown, so there might be some kind of superstar shakeup between now and then. But I do think that, and maybe this is just me hoping that Shinsuke wins, because I really hate seeing Shinsuke lose title matches here. So yeah, I'm going with Shinsuke winning and holding the title at least until Starrcade. You have him drop at Starrcade, and then build up the feud, give him another match at WrestleMania where he gets his WrestleMania moment, unless you give him a title match at Royal Rumble and then he reclaims it then. But again, that might be, too hot potatoey for some. And now to the final match, the Falls Count Anywhere Hell in a Cell match between, here comes the money, Shane McMahon versus Kevin Owens. Now, this is going to be a match, especially now that it's a Falls Count Anywhere match, to where you have to ask yourself, what is Shane going to fall off of? What is Shane going to jump through? And will Kevin Owens do a pop-up powerbomb on top of the cell? And then will he go for the pin on top of the cell? Now, you might be asking yourself, how's he going to do a pop-up powerbomb when there's no ropes to bounce Shane off of? Well, easy. You have the two guys climb up on opposite sides of the cell. Shane runs at Kevin. Kevin then does the pop-up powerbomb, and of course, you're going to want to reinforce the top of that cell so that when you do the pop-up powerbomb on top of the cell, you don't then fall through the cell and have a Mick Foley situation, or worse, have a New Jack Vic Grimes situation to where Shane falls through the cage, Owens falls through the cage, and then Owens lands on Shane's head. That would absolutely be horrible. I don't want that to happen. Please, Shane, don't die. But then there's also the speculation of, will Shane go for an elbow drop on Kevin from the top of the cell and then go for the pinfall outside the ring and also outside the cell? But then I did hear speculation that while it's Falls Count Anywhere, it's anywhere inside of the cell, so that pinfall on top of the cage would not be a legitimate pinfall. A pinfall on the announce table would not be a legitimate pinfall because that's not inside the cell. But again, the rules here seem to be a little blurry. KO's definitely winning. Again, the only question is, what sort of weird, goofy things are going to wind up happening? And again, please, Shane, don't die. Don't forget, if you like the show, share it on the social medias and consider joining the Penguin Club. PenguinClubPod.com. Oh, and if you're still listening, you too get a too sweet